So you're back for more adventures in cyberspace. Good, because we're doing something really interesting this week, having spent the past two expeditions looking at primary sources. This time we're going to have a look at some secondary sources, and we're going to look at how to use Google to search for research, as a research tool. So come along and we'll get started. So here we are on Google, and we're having a look at women's footwear of the 1920s, carrying on from what we had a look at in the archive. So this is what you get when you put literally women's footwear in the 1920s into Google. You get a whole load of different results, not all of them necessarily useful. So this is what we're having a look at. This is the first one that seemed interesting. This is a website from somebody who is genuinely interested in this area. They're interested in vintage clothing, and it's quite a good site, quite a good beginning your research look. They've used a lot of primary sources, all these pictures, and they're talking about a wide variety of footwear, which is the sort of thing that you want to be looking at. You want to be looking at, are they using primary sources? Is the site made by somebody who has absolutely no idea what they're doing? Or is it made by somebody who might be an enthusiastic amateur? An enthusiastic amateur can be a good place to start. We're not going to want to restrict ourselves to only enthusiastic amateurs, however, but they can be a good place to start, because people who are amateur but have a deep love of something will spend a lot of time digging around and finding stuff that frankly you don't want to. Now this at the bottom has advertising for other shoes, so obviously there's a degree of sponsorship there, which is sort of the problem when you start looking at blogs and amateur things. So we go back to our Google page and have a look at our next site. As you can see, I'm skipping several. I'm skipping the Pinterest because it's really just images, and I'm also, you'll see that I skip Wikipedia. Now this is one that is made, that is clearly more a piece of journalism. Turns out not to be as useful as the previous one. That's one of the big things, is some of them have very dubious use. Some of them just put out the same thing over and over, which can become especially problematic when a source that you're looking at is just repeating misinformation that they got from another site, and so that these can become a bit more difficult. So in order to improve my searches, I've put the word scholar, or you can also use academic, and that will change the sorts of sources that you start to get, because what I was getting was very much amateur stuff. I wanted stuff that was a bit more academic, a bit more serious. Now, the first thing that we're having a look is a book. It will throw up books. Whether the book is useful or not, you can have a look at the preview and see. This one had 1920s in the notes in the back of the book, but it does give you an option of where the book is, where it comes from, that you can then search it out online further. So books, finding the books like this online can be quite useful. Not always easy to access the whole thing because of the copyright. You often need to then go to the library or go to a bookshop to try and find what you're after. But it is an option. So again, we're having another look along here. This one is another site that took a little bit of time to load there. Sorry. Another site that I found that was very much about fashion, not not just about footwear, but moving around the whole fashion. Obviously, if you're looking at footwear, you are going to be interested in fashion. This one's not a bad site, actually. And one of the things that I liked about this is they reference where they got their information from, which means that you can then find those sources. So you've got books, you've got writers to look for. So you're not just looking at the source itself. You can actually find, well, where did they find their stuff? Which is immensely useful because it helps you follow that little breadcrumb trail here. And often you're not just looking for a thing, you're looking for a thing to put it into a context, and being able to know where a writer, a blogger, or an academic or whatever found their information can really, really help. Again, this is another one that is, I think I didn't spend too much time here because there was a bit of advertising on it. It wasn't so useful. It had modern shoes, not just the 20s ones, but it was more contextual. Now, this is all on the first page. Most people don't leave the first page. What happens when you start leaving the first page of Google and go on to the second page? You get lesser known or lesser searched things. So the further down the rabbit hole you go, the further along you click along the pages. Now, most people won't search beyond the first couple of sites. I am here to tell you, as a researcher, you need to go beyond the first couple of sites that turn up on Google. Now, this one was interesting. It was not exactly what we were looking at, but this is about the Chinese women who didn't bind their feet. They were not the Han Chinese. These are, I can't remember which group they were, but their shoes. And the fact that these women, with the unbound feet, actually formed in the 1920s, I had a bit of a read of it, the beginnings of the Chinese feminist movement, women's movement in China. So that was really fascinating. That's the other thing. You can start going down a rabbit hole looking at one thing and then think, oh, hang on, that's really fascinating. I'd like to find out more about this. And so that's one of the things that makes this kind of research fascinating, just as it does when you look at the archives and when you look at the old newspaper reports. Generally speaking, you want to do your big heavy research ahead of time, because you may discover something as you're researching and just go, wow, I so want that. I am going to change my entire project and move in that direction instead. Which is fine if you haven't started writing. As you write, you generally want to use your research to, oh, I need to know this or I need to know that. But your big heavy stuff you want to get done ahead of time. Now, this one is a PDF. This is actually shoe archaeology, like looking at the way that things were made and how they were made at specific periods to understand what you're digging up out of the ground. Now, this again is something that you probably, okay, I want to know about this, that, and the other, about shoes that you might think, or whatever it might be, that we had a look at the beginning. But this, as you delve deeper, you start to get a whole load of information. The big temptation once you start deep diving is that you end up dumping it into your book, which is not good. However, if you have a better understanding of things, then the world that you create becomes more real. Remember, PDFs you can download too, so that's always good. And any site that you find, you want to use your bookmarks, find a bookmark, create a folder and save all your websites so you can go back to them and double check things like that. This is another PDF. Again, now the PDFs that I've used, these are either doctoral theses or this one's a doctoral thesis looking at women's clothing in the 20th century, I think. Or they've come out of universities. You want to look for credible sources. You want to look for people who are actual historians, because actual historians are going to put what you are looking at into a context. And context is really, really important. If you don't have context, what happens is you just have a bunch of facts, a bunch of things, which is pretty useless. This is another one that comes out of a university. I really do like looking at things that come out of universities because there's a bit of rigor behind them. They're not just someone's blog post that's repeating myths or repeating things that we think we know. To be published with a university's backing, it needs to be peer reviewed. It's, you know, it's just better quality of source, and it's going to provide you with a lot of detail you perhaps didn't realize you might need or don't know that you necessarily want. But that's just one of the things about this, is you want to keep your mind open in your research period. You don't want to close yourself off and decide, okay, I'm only doing it about this and I only want to hear about this and I'm just doing it this way. Because you will find that it just closes down your options too much, which you don't want to do. Now, this is towards, like, you know, you do start getting stuff that you don't need. This is about woolen shoes. This is not our period. So we had a bit of a look at this, but went back. No good for us. So the further you get along, you find things that are useful, and you also find things that are not useful. So the less useful they are, this one I think is the Victoria and Albert Museum, so really, really good. Nice source there. As you go deeper, sometimes they can get a bit obscure. Eventually I got to the point where it was just talking about high heel shoes, and that was pretty much useless to me. This is talking about Coco Chanel. So obviously, if you're looking at fashion, look at the big fashion houses, that especially, you know, ones that were around there. Coco Chanel, big fashion designer of this period, and so really has a huge influence on the silhouette, the design of the period. Even though a lot of women made their own clothes, they wouldn't have had a Chanel dress, it's still influencing them. You know, you can use Google to find those primary sources as well, but they are harder to find on Google. They're more buried. So here we got to a point where it was just pointless. So I switched and went over to the State Library of New South Wales. And the State Library of New South Wales, you can access their digital collection using a library card, which means that you can get a hold of academic essays. Yay! That's just me being a complete nerd. But I put same in there and searched, and it was behaving rather badly for me today. I don't know why. I think it might have been the time of day. But then you get all these different essays, and you can, if you look down the one side, you can see the ways that you can refine your search. You can refine it to peer-reviewed pieces, which is good. You can look at the full text. When I clicked on that, it did take me, I took that out of the preview, took me to a bit where you put your library card number in. You don't necessarily... To use this, I was able to use my local council library card. I'm not sure how that is for other states or in other countries, but I was able to use a library card from my local council. So it's nice. I don't think it nice and accessible. I don't think it's hard to get a library card for the State Library in New South Wales. So hopefully from that, you've seen how to look at, how to find, and a little bit be starting a little bit to work out how to evaluate the value of a source that you find online. Looking at how to follow trails, looking at how to decide whether or not something is worth looking at, and looking at knowing the difference between primary and secondary sources, remembering we have spent 2 expeditions looking at primary sources, and this is our first look at secondary sources and how they are just as valuable but in a different way to the primary sources. So again, make sure you like and subscribe, and meet us here again next time for another expedition into cyberspace.